obviously to open up.
Audio.
I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I can't hear the meeting at all. Once you started recording, we lost sound.
How about now?
Yep, that's better.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you all. So I was just going over what's on the slide with the budget. And then obviously implementation will be over the next 2 fiscal years. Big picture, the city's projecting a deficit in the upcoming years due to several factors, and so we're preparing for that. We've been directed to generally keep our budgets flat from the last 2 years, looking forward the next 2 years. CDD's budget is actually going down because part of our budget is based on anticipated revenues, and we're anticipating revenues to go down. That's, I think, in part both due to kind of slowing down some of the larger tracks of development we're seeing, and then also just generally slowing down in building and permit levels. The general themes for community development, obviously housing, still here. The major city goal did change. We talked about this last time. It's a little more detailed. It talks about safe housing, renter protections, neighborhood wellness, as well as housing production. And we still have homelessness as a major city goal. Infrastructure reveals itself, in the major city goals. And then obviously throughout all the major city goals, and I think this is an important one for us to all think about, is the required work programs needed to address the changing regulations at the state and federal level. So like a big one is the fire maps. Those are going to impact a lot of things. And we're going to kind of have to think on our feet of how does that impact things in ComDev? How does that impact things in the sustainability and natural resources group, fire, things like that. And then we're always trying to kind of catch up to the state housing laws as well. There's also new laws kind of constantly about when we have to update certain general plan elements. So those things will kind of be part of our work going forward as well. You could move forward, Lala. I wanted to just cover very, very briefly the work program items that we have committed to with council. These are the things that will be adopted in June and we'll move forward with. And I'm covering them so I can highlight the ones that I think you all might be interested in that are specifically related to development and housing. So the first is, one is that the director will organize a focus group to explore barriers to residential infill development. That one came specifically out of this group where we keep circling around, like, why aren't people utilizing the downtown density program? Why aren't we seeing more infill? What are the barriers there? What are the potential low-hanging fruits and longer-term things we can change? And so I will be looking to this group and other groups in the city to find people who are interested in being in that focus group. And I'm really hoping that we can come up with some like really concrete things that we can look at changing as we look to figure out how we get more infill in the key areas of downtown. We also talked a little bit about, we're doing a lot of study sessions. One will be about the growth management regulations. If you've been paying attention to the general plan annual report, we actually hit the 1% growth cap / goal for the first time ever last year in 2024. And so one of the things we told council we would do is come back and have a study session about what that means. Because I think, there's a little bit of confusion, and rightfully so, the regulations have changed over time, but what does that mean? And it doesn't mean that we're gonna close the door to new permits right now. There's things that we need to do in the future about kind of metering out large specific plan projects. But this is gonna be that conversation with city council of, okay, we hit the 1%, what does that mean? I highly recommend you all pay attention to that one, because I think it will be an interesting discussion point for kind of the slow growth versus pro housing, and see where that goes. I think, we all see where the state's going with things like this, so I don't know how much longer this will exist. The state already pushed back in the last housing element cycle with cities that had kind of growth caps that existed. So we're also going to do a study session on the fire hazard maps. I'll talk about the fire hazard maps in a little more detail in a second. That's a really interesting one for you all to be involved in as architects and builders and developers, because that will impact a lot of new development in the city. And then implementing actions related to the fire maps. So on the next one. And so then we get to expansion and diversification of housing opportunities. We're gonna do some work with our below market rate program. We're going to create a handbook on ADU and urban lot splits to try to make the regulations more clear and accessible to the general public. We will do, will happen twice in the next 2 years, which is our annual update for zoning regs to both comply with state law and also do cleanup. So this is where I imagine anything we didn't pick up in the last ADU ordinance updates, if we're hearing similar things coming up, this is where we're gonna gather those all together and try to address some of those barriers that continue to exist. And then the last two are related to the housing element updates. We're gonna be gearing up for the next housing element at the end of the next fiscal plan. The next one, Mala. And then the council is really interested in safe, healthy, and affordable housing, and this is where the renter protections issue starts to come into play in the work program items. So we'll be doing a few study sessions here, one about needs and opportunities regarding renter protections. So that'll be a study session, could lead to some direction from council to staff work. A study session on a potential rental housing registry. That's something that's come up from the public, and the council's interested in understanding more about that. So if that's something of interest to you, please attend those meetings. And then we will be adopting and implementing the new building codes and creating a strategic plan for the safe housing program, including outreach. Next one. And then this gets to neighborhood livability. So we are going to look at updating the tree regulations. So starting that update, we realized, the tree regs, very interesting, pretty onerous. And I think with state law, ADU law, housing law, fire maps all coming into play, we're gonna really have to relook at how we regulate trees in this town and how we facilitate a process that is both protective of our urban forest, but also not a barrier to fire safety and housing. We're going to look at code enforcement priorities related to safe housing and livable neighborhoods, update property maintenance standards to ensure they align with city priorities, and then one thing, if you were there, for concerns about Greek houses in certain neighborhoods in the town. So talking through how we enforce our zoning codes for Greek life houses. I think, next slide, Lola, that wraps up, ooh, go back, I don't show them on yet. Okay, I think that wraps up our work program items. Does anyone have any questions about that? There are also a few ComDev related ones in other areas. We have the homelessness response, major city goal, which I haven't even touched on here, but there's a lot there. And then also Tyler's team is working on the historic preservation ordinance update and new, we'll be redoing the resources inventory. So keep an eye on that if that's of interest to you, John.
So I guess my question would be, talking about growth cap and tree regulations, it seems like
Did you say cap?
the growth cap,
Okay.
the growth cap.
Making sure.
Sorry, and the tree regulations. I mean, it seems like those are pretty, the growth cap especially is a pretty simple issue to solve. It's getting to where it's illegal at the state level. There are plenty of communities without a growth cap. Why is that a work item? Why isn't that just we're gonna strike the growth cap from the books?
Well, good question. This is just a study session to explain what it is. And so here's what happened. We had our general plan annual report for the first time ever we hit that cap. The general plan annual report was a consent item that needed to go to the state. And so we wanted to just be able to have a follow-up discussion so that we have a public conversation to kind of explain, like, this doesn't shut the door. This doesn't mean things stop immediately. It doesn't, like, so that this is just a chance for us to all have that conversation. The growth cap was adopted by the vote of the public. And so it's not as easy as the council just saying, well, forget about it. Because there's, if it's something that was a vote of the people, that's different. And so this is kind of a time to have an explanation. We'll talk about it at the study session, but it doesn't really do much. It basically says that, the planning department and building department will, in certain annexation areas of the city, work with the developer to have phasing plans to address the numbers. And what I think will happen is we were at a point where there was just a lot going on with San Luis Ranch and Avila Ranch and Rigetti all at the same time. And I actually think given what I'm seeing right now, we're gonna drop back under the number.
I guess I understand the sentiment that it doesn't affect much, but then again, it doesn't, why have it? Why, and if it takes public action to remove it, then why not just go that route and be done with it? Because I feel like and again, I feel like the tree regulation is kind of the same conversation, right? We have these sort of onerous processes and some of these things like this, like at what point do we say, God, why are we even talking about this? Why are we spending city dollars figuring it out? Why don't we figure out a way to solve it permanently?
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
and especially with the growth cap, they weren't usually from a real inclusionary place that growth caps were born and put into practice, right?
Yes.
It's ugly, and so it feels like even that would have political will at council level and with the demographic in the city. So yeah, I guess that's what I would say. Some of this stuff is like, man, can't we just not have a study session? Can't we just get to where it's like, never have to talk about it again?
So the study session is, I need direction from council to say, yeah, figure out how to get rid of this. I can't just, so that's the point of the study session. Here's what it is. We hit it for the first time. That's what this means. Do you want to provide a direction to staff regarding this issue? So that's really where the study session comes into play, is like, staff needs the direction from city council to tell us the policy decision that they would like us to explore. But that's a really good question. Same with the trees, right? So council hasn't yet told us, figure out how to make the tree stuff. This is our way of asking the question so we can get direction.
It feels like we're on our back heels a lot about that stuff, right? Because what's happening is the trees are just, again, when you have an ADU versus tree, you just circumvent the tree regulations anyway at this point.
Right, which is
And
why
so-
we're asking to change them.
So we had a couple of years where we were actually over 1% growth in the individual year, right? So there were years where it was like up to 1.22%. But I guess I hear the concerns about the cap, but we weren't like pausing during those individual years. And we still only got up to 1.22%, which I think our highest single year. So like, I understand that there's concern with having a cap, but is there actually the will to build at 2%, 3% at any given time? Is there actually that will?
Why, it's not a concern, we all know that we throw out the cap, why have it, why have it?
No, I totally
Yes.
understand. I think I'm just asking from like a very practical standpoint. Like, do we want to invest a ton of time into trying to take something out of policy if it's not going to be a limiting factor?
And John, I think your comments are exactly what the purpose of that study session is, so that the council can hear from the public of like, why do we have this? Tell staff to get rid of it, or tell staff to explore how to get rid of this. It does become a little more complicated because of the vote of the people.
Mhm.
You know, there's a world in which the state helps us because of the next housing element, it just becomes a non-issue anyway. But that's what we'll be talking about in the study session. But I think there also could be people that come out on the other side of this issue, which is, I think, if you feel strongly about it, is why it's so important that you're there
Right.
at the council. But the council saw this in the general plan annual report, and nobody said anything like, oh my God, we hit the cap. You know, they saw it, we gave the explanation about what it means, and so this is our attempt to daylight it so that they can't give us direction if they want us to go in one way or another with it. So, heard.
How much of that cap plays into infrastructure planning, if at all?
It's kind of the other way around, which is the cap was put in place, well, it is stated that in part of the reason the cap is in place, and we can all, you know, theorize why it existed over time, but it's so that we didn't grow so much that we couldn't catch up with the infrastructure. So the idea was like, if we assume 1% every year from whenever to whenever, you know, 2035, end of the general plan, we have studied the availability of water and can we catch up with infrastructure. And so that was a stated reason for the cap.
Yeah, and I only asked the question in response to your question is, if it was more like a minimum, like that we should be targeting.
Oh, interesting.
Well, and this is a pro-housing, we're in a pro-housing time.
Yeah,
right? So like,
exactly, and like, there's a lot to coordinate,
So like
right?
if there was an incentive to get the community up to 1% and then that incentive went away at 1%.
Or, yeah, I mean,
Structure
there's
to
lots
your
of ways
system.
to think through
Yeah.
it, but I'm thinking more in terms of like utilities, transportation, we're all trying to plan towards something.
Uh-huh.
If we're planning towards, like, we're confident we're actually gonna do better than 1%, that changes a lot of the thought processes.
Right.
Whereas if you're like, we have a cap at 1%, changes a lot of thought processes.
I see what you're saying.
So, I mean, in my world, I'm thinking about trying to change everything to be more abundant, housing more abundant, that, you know, we all read the book, I assume at this point. If we're working towards a vision and a goal that changes the script on housing, and we can all get aligned, this is the metric that aligns us.
And I think that's exactly what Timmy's saying, is that voice is what just needs to be put before the decision makers at city council.
I think we all know this is a remnant of
Mhm.
slow growth era of this city.
Yeah.
Right, and so it's, I think, politically currently outdated for at least who sits on the council, right, and a lot of people in this room. That's not to say everyone in the city agrees with it. So I think that I'm bringing this up so that if you care about this, like, your voice is heard, because it is possible that, you know, people who feel the opposite way also come out and speak on it. So that's for everyone's awareness.
And that's on an agenda, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, there will be a study session, I think, the first or second quarter of the next fiscal year, so.
And that feedback's really, that's the first time I've heard that feedback. So I think that that's really an important voice to hear at that study session.
But there is no date yet for that.
I haven't like solidified, we're still kind of, but I will absolutely let this team know when these things fall into a for sure date. So, but I think important for you all to know, like, this is not affecting the way we do anything at this point in this department. We're still processing things as we get them, we're not metering things out, like, it has changed nothing about what we're doing. I understand the issues with planning and, you know, the look of it, but just on a day-to-day basis, it hasn't affected anything we're doing. So with that, we'll go to the next item. So, AB 2097, this is a state law that's been in place for maybe 2 or 3 years at this point about major transit stops and transit stations. And in January, HCD came out with a new interpretation that any train station, whether manned or unmanned, whether a train comes once a day or once every 10 minutes, counts as a major transit stop, which is different than the interpretation we've had in the past. So good news for some people.
Yeah.
Um,
That's big.
within a half mile of, and this half mile radius is from the parcel boundaries of the Amtrak station. So not just the point, not just like the station, but the parcel boundaries. So within a half mile, and it's about 2,000 parcels and about 1,500 of them are residentially zoned. We cannot require parking, and it's not just for housing, it's for pretty much any project. There's some minor exceptions per state law, like hotels and things like that. But we cannot require or enforce parking regulations. So I wanted to let you all know. Smile.
This is,
I'm shocked, I'm like absorbing the information.
no,
Do you mean you're gonna be removing parking meters within a half-mile radius of Amtrak?
Parking meters? No, this is just if you want to develop a project, like if it's
Without
on
parking,
private
okay.
property.
Okay.
Nothing to do with public parking, nothing to do with street parking. But if you came to us and said, I wanna build something on one of these lots,
With no parking.
I have no ability to require you to provide parking.
Is this layer on the GIS now?
I don't know if it is yet.
Yeah,
It is, okay.
And does that rewrite the impacts or the in lieu parking fee?
It actually does overlap with part of the in lieu map. So parts of the downtown in lieu area, you now wouldn't have to pay an in lieu fee because like there's no parking required. So it'll affect our ability to collect in lieu fees in the downtown area.
Was there a population calculation that went with this? Or
No, this, and I am only, I waited 4 months to tell you this because I wanted to make like quadruple sure that we were
Are you
right.
disappointed that we're not all just like jumping?
Yes! It's the best news I've ever given you.
Timmy, I have a question, Timmy. On the, if you were to go on the Amtrak website, it also lists a Cal Poly stop.
Oh, no, okay.
It does.
Does it
Yeah, it
stop
does.
there?
I don't know.
I don't think
There's-
I've ever
I think,
gone
I think the
there.
bus might
It's a
stop,
bus
the
train,
bus
yeah.
stops there.
Okay,
That's a transit stop.
I don't know. So train is different. If it's a bus, then you get into this formula of, are there two intersecting bus lines that stop at an average of 15 minutes? That's why we don't have
Okay.
other ones around town. That's why this downtown one isn't one. But I will look into that.
Yeah, curious.
So-
'cause-
With that, are you guys gonna look at adding major transit stops in other parts of the city to, like, what it would take to upgrade downtown?
That is a transit, I mean, Luke, I know Luke has probably heard this from people, but that's a,
Well, but the answer would come from planning. It requires this many buses downtown, right? It's sort of a collaborative deal. You guys would have to say,
Sure.
we need 10 buses an hour, and then Luke can figure out whether he can do it or not. But to my knowledge, we haven't even looked at it at that level. Anywhere in town, like, oh, if we added 3 buses, then we would have this. But that math has to come from you guys, not from Luke.
well, it doesn't, it comes from the state.
Yeah, but I guess like, well,
We have
yeah,
not looked at purposely creating that. I understand that we've talked about this, and I'm sure Luke's talked about this with people. I think really what's driving the transit is not the impact on potential development, but like where the users are and where they need to go in funding. But that's definitely something I have heard from people is like, can we change buses so that we create that thing over time? The challenge with that, like, the beauty of the Amtrak station is it is a station. It exists at any time of day. The challenge with the bus thing, honestly, is you might have that for a year, and then because of budget cuts, you know, that bus only comes once every half an hour, and so then it's,
just
The
if our
next
major
year-
city goals were just housing and more green transportation, maybe we would. Gosh, it's only aligned with our major city goals.
So, I mean, transit is very hard to fund, right? And so I think that's the bottom line, is if we had infinite dollars, we could put buses everywhere and never leave it around, but that's just not the case. But I hear that argument, and we've heard that before, and it's definitely a conversation that we can have, and once we do hit that threshold, we'll obviously take a look at that, but
When does this go into effect?
it's now,
It's now,
4 months ago.
4 months ago.
That's the only reason we're not cheering, because we heard about it.
Well, see, it's you give a mouse a cookie.
I've already used the GIS link on and off, so.
Would that include replacing parking that was removed for a development?
Yes, so this is, we cannot require new parking or enforce parking minimums. So it's like so broad. I lived through this in LA, and it basically kind of wipes the slate clean. So you could build over existing parking. So not only would you not need to park, let's say you wanted to put a fourplex on a surface lot of a duplex, not only would you not need to park that fourplex, you also wouldn't need to replace the parking of the duplex.
What about displaced parking for development, street parking?
What do you mean?
Well, if your development is going to be removing street parking.
So that's a separate issue. Like, that's kind of an issue between you and the city, because that's not a required parking spot, but that is a parking spot that the city's providing, just so that's a separate issue.
Okay.
But it's a good point.
And then like parking for like a mixed use, like the commercial aspect of it would also be part of this?
Correct.
Yeah, so take a look at the state law. I will say there are a few exceptions, but they are minimal. I think I can remember hotels for some reason, it's ringing a bell, convention centers, I mean, if you read the So anyone online, questions? I don't see anything.
The last 4 months.
Really interesting I think development, and keep that in mind. But I will look into the Amtrak station at Cal Poly, that's an interesting question. Cool. Next. Fire maps. So I think you probably are all aware that the new maps were released by CAL FIRE earlier this year, and the city is required to adopt them by July. They'll be considered for first reading on June 3rd of this year. So I encourage you to all keep your eyes open for the staff report that will come out a week before that. I'll show a picture of the current maps. I mean, there's like a very few parcels in the very high zone, and the new map is 60% of the parcels in the city are in some zones of moderate, high, or very high. Huge change for us. So some communities had very little change. We had a very significant change. 28% of the city by area, 28% of the cities in the very high zone now, 10% in high, and 25% in moderate. And so put a link here where you can see the maps. Well, if you go to the next page. So this will show you on the left is the existing map. So like anything that's shaded out, like a pinkish red, that's not local responsibility area. The dark red is what you see that is kind of in the city and very high. And you'll see currently again, there's a few parcels in the very high, but nothing else. And then the new maps are on the right, and you'll see that it's really hard to tell on this screen, but you can see red, and then it goes orange and yellow. So at the edge of all the red, there's orange and then yellow. And so there's a pretty good CAL FIRE map where you can click at a parcel level and see where you end up or where a property ends up. So I would say, take this into consideration if you're working on new projects. Next slide, Lola.
Are these the maps that insurance companies are gonna be using for
sure.
rating?
I mean, they'll definitely look at them.
I mean,
And
that's
so-
what they use now, so
Yeah.
this is an update.
Yeah. So, yeah,
Will there be building code differences and changes per zone? Or is it just, because I've heard some communities are adopting one enhanced standard for all zones.
So we already have an enhanced standard under the designation of community at risk, where we incorporate several provisions of Chapter 7A into all new construction. The primary differences in the new zones, which will be applied to very high and high, are gonna be tempered windows, are gonna be gutters, gutter covers. And I think there's like underfloor protection, but that is, we typically do slab on grades, and so I don't think it's gonna have a huge impact. So there will be some construction changes, decking materials, but it's not gonna be overly substantial.
And why not have it more for the very high and then gradually less?
The state requires very high and high to be that's chapter 7A. And then the city just adopted in 2012 that there is a minimum home hardening standard throughout the city.
Okay.
So it's going to increase the application of some of those codes in the new high and very high areas. The other thing too is then that also triggers, when that standard is required, that triggers the requirement for defensible space out of chapter 49 of the fire code.
And this goes into effect in the new building code, or when does this go into effect?
Go ahead.
Yeah, this will go into effect, I think August 3rd, so it's gonna be first read or.
The July 1st. So the first readings of January, right?
Yeah.
July 1st is when we have to adopt the maps.
Mhm.
I think officially, like that, the state, like these are real.
Mhm.
The things that we need to, and I mentioned this in here, like more work will have to be done. And so the staff report on the 3rd, I think will be helpful for what is defensible space, what does that mean, what are the 7A requirements? But there's a lot more we're gonna have to work through, in terms of what does enforcement look like? Is the city, what type of enforcement program is the city gonna create? And things like that, just based on resources, what will that look like?
Yeah, and so nothing's ironed out yet. What we're currently looking at is having to create a new fee for that additional review. But we're going to first study the issue, time and motion of when these reviews come in, and does it actually take more time to do the review? Where I can see it having more of an impact is with defensible space review. And that's gonna be done through the fire department. So we're still working to find out if that review is gonna be like a deferred submittal or how we're going to process it.
So,
I have a suggestion or a comment.
Mhm.
All the building code stuff makes sense. I think maybe just something to note is that through architectural review, there's a lot of stuff that comes up in that process of decorations and unnecessary things that would conflict with this. So.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, like, oh, we like the windows there, but we wanna see this awning over it and like.
Wooden awning.
You're trying to make a contemporary design and we want all this decoration there. And we have a challenge with a lot of craftsman style stuff. And I think contemporary design is coming further into the more mainstream, but there's been a lot of studies in like the Palisades and stuff that a lot of the homes that did better, like had minimal eaves and that kind of stuff. So just noting that there could be a conflict between what an ARC board is telling a developer, architect, whatever, to design that could conflict with this.
Yeah.
So 7A in general isn't just about what items need to be built in which way, that the overall concept is ignition resistant features. So when I hear about, cornices or eaves or projections, I guess my question to a developer would be, is there a non-combustible alternative? Or is there?
It's just, I guess, from somebody that's trying to design a contemporary building that doesn't want all that stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's forced upon us, and it's adding money, and so it's all adding to the housing cost. Things being too expensive and maybe not what an owner person wants to design.
It'll help with the 1% cap.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm trying to
There's
understand.
no perfect solution, I'm just
Yeah.
noting it, that there could be a conflict between planning. and-
Yeah, that's good enough, thank you.
yeah, I absolutely, and that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, it's like some of the fire things are not in our work program, but we're gonna have to address them. Because as we drill deeper into these, we're gonna start finding those
Yeah.
things, right? And I think we've already flagged tree regs as something that will be in conflict with the fire regs, right? And so we need to address is our code preventing people from doing the exact thing that we're telling them to do, and that we're, like, as we find those, we're gonna have to address them, but I think that's a really good example.
Including just green code with all the shading requirements in parking lots.
Mhm.
That's just a hard one to do other than through trees.
Yeah.
Mike, maybe you would know this. How is the defensible space requirement gonna be affected in infill lots? Right, because it feels like most of that map, the areas where you're looking at putting a lot of that overlaid into like parts of downtown and stuff. And so what does defensible space look like on Marsh?
So,
Can we cut down some of the trees?
well, that's gonna be the issue, and so the staff report will have, for example, like 0 to 5 feet from your building, what does that mean? 5 to 30 feet from your building, what does that mean? And then there's questions of, and these are all natural questions, right? Okay, what if I do the defensible space correctly on my home, but my neighbor who is 20 feet from me isn't doing that, like that's impacting me, right? Or there's city open space next to me, what does that look like? So there's a million iterations of this question. So part of the work that needs to be done here is just really clear, and that's where fire is involved in this, obviously, is clearly outlining like exactly how do I comply with that on Marsh or up off of Johnson, right? And it might look a little different, but we need to be really clear with people about what does that look like in the various kind of zones, defensible space zones.
Yeah, and so with chapter 7A, obviously any new construction in those zones is gonna have to comply. Any renovations that is changing out materials, that those new materials would have to be ignition resistant or Class A roof. I think that certain sections of the code require the entire roof to be updated if like 50% or more is being impacted. So I think what I'm hearing the question though is you have existing spaces that are now being incorporated into the fire severity zones. And how do we enforce against those for defensible space? And what I'll say is when there is a trigger, when 7A is required for new construction, defensible space gets enforced as well. However, what we're talking about right now is standing up a just enforcement program for defensible space. It's just not, we're just in that planning stages. And what I'll say is the extent of the conversations are, it's going to start with education.
Yeah, and I'm more concerned really that you're gonna do a downtown parcel that's 0 setback, and we're gonna have a defensible space review where there's no ability for, like, we're in a doom loop of like, oh, you need to prove your defensible space. And it's like, well, no, it's a zero lot line.
You
There's
can
no,
only address what's on your property.
Yeah,
but
but I think what you're saying is there needs to be, I'm just thinking of like our construction debris demolition requirements for, so there's like a certain threshold where if you're not over this amount, then you're exempt from it, right? And you still have to, though, submit the form, we still have to look at it. And so there'll probably be something like that where it's like, hey, I'm actually exempt from this review. But I'm hearing that that's what you need to see in it is.
it'd be better than having staff try to do defensible space on stuff that's not
Yes, fair.
applicable. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So lots more information to come. I want to just highlight this for everyone. I really think you should take a look at the June 3rd staff report if you have the chance. I will get it out to this group when it's published, but there'll be more information there. And a lot of the more detailed questions are gonna emerge as we continue to go through this process. So, and we're also gonna be looking at partner agencies. There are cities that have been dealing with this for longer than we have with more parcels. So what are best practices that exist in the world and how has that played out? So.
What's the disclosures line? space requirements,
Uh,
disclosures.
Yeah, so there are, and I'm not super familiar with it, but I think at least in the very high, there's some disclosures that have to happen upon sale.
Oh, okay.
And even maybe
Notifications,
some inspections that have to happen before properties are sold. So. All right.
Michael had his hand up a little bit
Oh,
ago.
yeah, Michael?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I just had a quick clarification for Mr. Lowe. We've got projects that are in construction and you mentioned the August date. If we have to come back in for plan revisions or things like that, are we still grandfathered in? Or do we have to, all of a sudden would have to comply if we had details that fell into this fire zone update?
I don't know.
Okay.
I would, if you
Yeah, no, that's a
can
good
plan
question.
for
I have
worst
it.
case scenario.
Yeah, I have to get back to you on that, but that's a good question. We haven't explored that question yet.
Right on. Thanks.
Good question. Thank you, Michael. All right, we'll keep moving.
Next one?
So just briefly, airport area specific plan update, next slide. So we've been working on this for a while. You all probably know generally where the airport area is highlighted in red. And they have flight safety zones related to the airport land use plan. And this area has not had housing allowed in it for a while because of the safety issues. But you can, next slide, Mala. More recently, the ALUC updated the plan to include revisions to the safety zone and noise contours. And so that opened this up for housing. And so staff has been working with consultants and the council approved the first reading of changes to the airport area specific plan to allow mixed use development in the parcel zone CS or M in that area. And it applies to things in zone 6, which is the least restrictive zone where we can now allow housing. And it would allow mixed use with the approval of a CUP subject to specific findings. And again, it's guided by overarching the airport land use plan. And so their change allowed us to make our change. We've excited about potential housing that can happen in this area. We've received a concept review already for a project in this area. And so the second reading will be
June 17th.
June 17th, but if you're interested, you know, we can answer questions or take in concept reviews and things will be in place by July. So I just wanted to give you that overview. It's an exciting development for more housing. Any questions?
Thank you.
Yes. Wow, thumbs up from John. Great, okay. All right, next slide. Plan release requests. This is more of like an FYI and just a interesting topic. And, you know, we get public records requests all the time from everyone about everything. And most of them are just us and we process them and we get people the records they need. Obviously, there are state law requirements about us releasing like architectural plans and engineering plans, and we're very careful to follow state law with that. So having said that, I just wanted to throw this out to the group. We get a lot of requests for plans, obviously a lot for houses. And we then have to send a letter to the architect or the group that did it. And if we don't hear back from you, we can release them. If we do and you say no, we can't generally. But you know, Lala does this work. And what I'll say is if you're with a larger firm or even have your own firm and you have a specific person or contact you want us to be sending those letters to, that's really helpful for us to know. I think Lala, what would you say, like 90% of the time hear nothing back?
I hear nothing back.
Yeah. And so I both want to make sure we're contacting the right people. You know, if you're concerned about us releasing plans, I want to make sure we have your contacts correctly. Some of these are like from the 60s or 70s, and so we just send them into the, you know, great unknown and they never come back. But, you know, if this is of interest to you, and you wanna provide us with an updated contact or like always send it to this person with this information, that's really, really helpful for us to know. We wanna make sure that you understand what's going on and that we're contacting the right people.
And some places don't allow us to release any of their plans, and which is fine too. If I know ahead of time, I don't have to waste a bunch of time writing a letter and sending it certified mail, waiting 30 days, like, so.
Yeah, and then we can give, the requester kind of a heads up of, hey, this firm generally doesn't release them, and, so we try to work with people and be reasonable and give them an idea of what the process looks like. But I just wanted to throw this out there in case anyone wanted to send it to me or send it to Lala, if you have any specifics for your firm or line of work that you want us to know.
I find it interesting that the default position is that if we don't hear from you, we're releasing. That seems opposite from what the state law says.
I think that there's some discretion in there, entrusted into the building official to make those determinations, regardless of the architect's,
I know we are required to release in terms of disaster recovery. There are some specific things about when we have to release. But I haven't looked at it in a long time, and maybe it's changed, but it's worth looking at.
I think you're right. I haven't looked at it in about 18 months. I took a class on it for building officials, and it was generally that the building official had discretion, and many of the building officials were upset with the policy. They're like, if it doesn't matter, then why do we even have to ask anyways? And so the way that I've approached it is to, as much as possible, respect the proprietary information, intellectual property of design professionals. At the same time, there usually is a public safety component to people requesting specific designs, whether it be for structural load transfers, for existing or renovations or something like that. So, but I'll look into it.
I would, because I have to do this all the time, like looking for plans, and anytime I go to a jurisdiction, it's always been, no. I would think that your point of even structural load stuff would be great for me to be able to get. I can't get that from any jurisdiction that I've worked in.
Are you having trouble getting it from us?
I haven't asked for people, such as the de facto has always been, no, I go right to the architect.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I can
We'll
look at it,
always-
I can look at it, yes, but I can't
So
take pictures of it, I can't learn anything really from it.
yeah, and I think the actual legal issue for us is in copying and reproducing the
Right.
the proprietary.
Right. Looking at it, I totally understand.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, but releasing, and that's what, I guess that's the point, looking at it versus releasing the PDF file to somebody because you didn't hear from the architect or the design professional seems the flip of what the intent was, but we can talk about it more later.
Yeah, we'll take a look at that. This is, we cover with our city attorney, but that's super helpful feedback. And, a lot of these are just like also very, very, very old.
Understand.
That's what I would like to add is like maybe there's a year span, because
Yeah.
a lot of times when I've done it, it's like this person's probably most likely deceased, like it's like super old.
And when I get those questions, one of the things I do is go to the state licensing website and see if there's an active license for them anymore, and they'll put on there when somebody's deceased as well. And so if that's the case, then.
But they, again, I don't want to belabor this, but they might have sold their rights to the
That's true.
successor company. Firms get merged all the time, and the rights of those things go with, in my opinion, so.
Yeah, super helpful.
Yeah.
So thank you, but, again, we want to make sure we are contacting you in the right way to the right person. So if there's specific things you want us to write, or if you're like, hey, we know you have to send it by certified mail, but also shoot me an email so I see it, like, let us know so that we have specific details for all of you. That'd be great.
As a designer, are you concerned with the city releasing like some plans that you submitted?
Usually not, but I guess I would say I prefer that the other designer contact me rather than they just being released, because you might be my competitor or my enemy, or I might want another crack at that work because it was a past client. So it kind of it could circumvent our kind of business model ever so slightly, but it's a little bit.
Right, that scares me though, because like, I could, like, that could create an environment, right, where we're picking on a little guy and not letting them like get access to plans or designs, right, because they're a competitor.
That's right, I'm a little guy.
Okay.
And
So you're looking at it for protection.
I'm just saying that might be a part of it. I mean, you could think about it as if, somebody wants to do a remodel on a project and there's no information, then I've got to go do all that work. If the city gives all that information, while more valuable and appreciated by me, I wouldn't do it without asking the design professional first, may I use your work? There's a respect part of it too that says, hey, are you, and I'll tell you how this came to pass in an actual project. Somebody said, hey, would you take this project, here's all the drawings. The first thing I do is I call the other designer and say, have you been paid? Are they just shopping with your work or these other things? It's just an ethical thing. I think you find out more about them.
And that's helpful for us to hear. We don't have any, I don't think we have any licensed architects on staff.
I agree.
Yeah.
So thank you. The other thing I'm just gonna add in here is, I don't know if I've had this issue with people here, but we get a lot of night work, we're having a lot of night work issues. So, it's less of a big deal, I think, for smaller projects, but it's just a reminder for everyone, if you think you need to do night work, please let us know earlier rather than later, because there's a process just in the code, we have to put it in the newspaper, so we are hampered by a timeline process, so people will call us and say, hey, I gotta do some night work on Thursday for my project, and we just can't do that. We also have to make sure an inspector is available at night. So when in doubt, tell us early, we'll help you through the process, we'll get you everything you need, but I just have seen it a lot lately of us having to tell people we can't accommodate that because of the noticing requirements related to night work. We can also approve night work for multiple, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to know on this specific, you could ask, hey, during this 2-week time, I'll need to do night work, so we can work with you to give you the flexibility you need if it's too far out, but at least we can get you the permit you need, so. All right, next slide. This is a super quick update. The engineers are not here, but they asked me to share this with you all, which is, go ahead, Lala. The engineering review division and the stormwater program manager are making changes that affect new development that are required to do post-construction requirements. And they usually have an operations and maintenance plan required prior to permit issuance because of the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And the identified current issue is that we don't have a standard O&M plan document, which delays review and makes things a little nutty. And so, and then also property owners look for, what do I need to do to maintain this, right? And sometimes it's not there, or it's not well done. And so there's also a high cost to applicants to do this. So next slide, Lala. So the engineering team is getting together with our stormwater program manager. We're gonna create a standard template for all O&M plans with required fields. It will be recorded with the stormwater conveyance document so that all property owners will have it in perpetuity. And so if you have questions about it, you can contact Keith or Gabe. This is really just a high level heads up. They're going to come back to this group to share it with you all for feedback. But I wanted to let you know this was happening. If you want to get involved earlier rather than later, please email them. And we're hoping to get it out in Q3 of 2025. So they're happy to answer questions. I know very little about this, but I wanted to share it with you all. Hopefully this is a step in the right direction of making it easier for everyone and more standardized.
So Q3 of 2025 to show what they're doing, or it'll be implemented?
No, I think to present this to you. I mean, I think they're hoping to have something to show people, answer questions, refine it, and get it out as soon as we can.
We've been getting letters from, I think, them about the stormwater conveyance systems that we have, and they've actually done the inspections and turned them in. So
Yeah.
they have started it, but they didn't have all of them.
Yes,
They
and we
only have
don't, and I think part of the challenge is too that they're not standard, right? So there's a lot of, depending on who worked on the project, different things. So we're hoping, making it easier for you all, making it easier for us with inspections and monitoring, that there's they're more standard.
It was like an online portal. Where we submitted.
Did you get a letter this year?
We did, we got a couple, and I called to ask because we weren't getting all of them, and they just said, well, we're just kind of starting it up.
Yeah, so we first sent out letters last year, and we sent out about 40 of them. And we've been working on trying to track down all of the applicable properties because a lot of our records for that are still in paper, and so we can't quickly queue them out of the online system, right? So I think over time, more and more letters are going out as they go. And so having 40, the year before that, we had like 3 letters go out.
Yeah, this was like about a month ago, I think.
Yeah, that's.
All right, oh, John. No, okay. And then last topic, last but not least. So I think some of you are waiting for this to happen at this meeting. Utilities team said they're not quite ready. They're not even here.
Greg said it's all going away. You don't have to worry about it.
And so they're looking to have a special meeting. I thought it would be a good idea to just have a meeting about this specific topic, so there's plenty of time to talk about it. So Chris Lehman is looking at the end of June. His ideal was the first week of July, but I wanted to throw it up to this group to make sure that's not a problem with conflicting vacations or anything related to July 4th.
Worst case, does that work for you, John?
I'll be there, it doesn't matter. I can disappoint my family for this.
There'll be a Zoom link, though.
Sorry, what?
There'll be a Zoom link, it can't be in person.
Yes, yeah, well, it'll be similar to this, Zoom link in person. And they wanna have the feedback in advance, obviously, of the council thing happen. So I think they're looking to fit it in early enough that they can have a robust conversation and things like that. Does that work for people, or is there anyone that's like, absolutely don't do that? Not seeing anything. Okay, so we'll get that information out to this group, and the meeting will be just for that topic. So I might not even go. Never fail. Okay, it's gonna be really fun, I can't wait. All right, with that is all we have. We can open it up for roundtable discussion, issues coming up. I always love to hear kind of what's going on out there in terms of economy, financing, barriers, things like that. So if you have anything you want to share or ask.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
So the prior one, maybe there was one in between. We talked about the ADU stuff. Was there one in between, or was that the last developer roundtable? I think it was like February or
Last February?
like a couple months ago.
Oh, no, that was quite a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any update to that? Because I know there was like a planning commission meeting and we talked about stuff.
Yeah.
Was there any?
So the council adopted what went to the city council. And we then have to submit that to the state for their review. And so we haven't heard back from the state.
None, but it is live on the, like the zoning code.
Okay, so the zoning code changes are in the code, they've gone into effect. One of the big changes we talked about, again, it's like getting rid of the roof form, some of the objective standards that maybe weren't quite objective, and then also the implementation of the one-step process instead of two-step process. If you're adding on, making it ADU, you don't have to pretend it's something else and then come back and turn it into an ADU. But
So some of the other things that we were talking about discussion wise, obviously there wasn't enough time to get it to planning commission.
Yeah.
Are those still things that at a staff level we can talk through, or is it just whatever got approved, that's the new law? And
Yeah.
black and white?
good question. Those are all things, we keep a running list, and that's where in the work program item, when we go and clean up the code, those are things I imagine we would keep putting in there unless it, yeah, I will say with a caveat. I hope that we wrote it well enough, the state goes, this is great, you don't need any more changes, but if they don't, you know, then I think we have an opportunity there.
So there's still a little room for interpretation.
Well, there's always room for interpretation. Yeah, so if you have something that's like an interpretation issue, you can absolutely bring that up with staff and it'll come to me. But if it's like a code thing, then it's something we'll make note of, and we talked about, this is gonna be iterative, right? We were mostly trying to address the state law compliance issues with some of the other things that are like this, we keep running into this thing, so let's just get this out of the way. And then as we have the conversation, more stuff came out, so we still have that list, and those are the things we're gonna start kind of taking care of as we move forward and do cleanups in the code, or if we have to go back and read the ADU ordinance in a few months, because the state says we can look at some of those as well.
So to have impact in that and be a part of that process, it's those workshop meetings or something you said?
One of them is the focus group for infill. I mean, I think ADUs could come into play there. I think that we had talked in that last meeting of having specific ADU conversations here. So that's the other thing I would say is, let's see what the state says. When we get our response from them, we'll have a developers roundtable where we either say, state thinks it's great, we don't have to make changes, but what are the other things? What are the next steps you all wanna see? Or we'll say, hey, the state's making us change X, Y, Z, and what are the next things you wanna see? So we'll keep that conversation going in this group. Any other questions, topics?
What's the status with the Upper Monterey?
Upper Monterey plan, that's a good question. The Upper Monterey plan, the work program item for staff for this current fiscal year was to start outreach. And so actually Mackenzie, the economic development team partnered with the planning group. Cadron came back for a little bit and did some outreach meetings with people about some really interesting feedback. More recently, the Cal Poly master's degree class actually took it up as a class project. So they've been looking at that area, and they're gonna go to planning commission. Nothing, it's not for adoption of anything, but to introduce some like conceptual ideas in 2 weeks.
On the 28th.
On the 28th. So if you're interested, you could watch it, come. You know, we don't have the budget to carry it further than it is now. And because of the current status of the budget, we couldn't ask for additional money to carry that plan forward. So the student project, I think, is a great way for us to get a little more traction and see if there's anything there we can pull out of it and start to implement. But that's the current status of the Upper Monterey effort.
Does the city have a vested interest in the airport or airport property at all to provide a voice to the county and general services? And here's my question. I just saw a note that the county plans to cover the lower parking lot in solar panels, I believe. And I'm curious why they would add infrastructure over the top of parking when that whole thing has really been designed as a 3 or 4 deck parking solution. Why would they do that? And I don't know if the city has any weight there, but I've always been perplexed as to why the county hasn't developed that thing whenever it overfills with parking all the time.
Yeah.
Well, they're expanding parking a couple different areas. Building a parking deck is incredibly expensive.
I'm clear, we know that,
So
but,
being able to pay for it, would be a challenge. I'm just speaking off the cuff.
I hear you.
I did receive a presentation earlier this week from them, Terry on Monday. That question didn't come up. I'm surprised it didn't, because I had the same one, but I didn't want to embarrass them. Right, but they are expanding the total number of spaces. The solar component will allow them to maintain current rates. To kind of pay for other things, other parts of the operation, but long term, yeah, they may be shooting themselves in the foot.
yeah, it's gonna never become a deck. It will never become additional level parking until.
They just added 144 spaces
Yeah,
at the
exactly.
top.
Right.
And we've talked to them about, but their attitude is it's like over 65 million the last time they checked, and they just said.
Yeah, we're going through with our program.
Right.
It's 100,000 plus the space.
Privatized.
For what it's worth, Cal Poly looked at more parking garages and they said we'd rather hire a bunch of valets and drive people to a surface lot than build another parking garage.
I'd add in with Greg's comments on the releasing of plans. I think the default should be no and not yes. I mean, just from a builder's perspective, we don't get plans out. I mean, it's so litigious. It's more the tracks that get screwed, but I don't ever want my plans out there. We'll fight to the very last minute.
I mean, to continue on that, ultimately, it's in our contract that says the architect owns forever and releases a license to use on that one site at that one time, like a software license. And you can't take your copy of Quicken and give it to somebody else. It's the same idea. It's a licensed thing that is allowed at that one moment. And it limits our liability too, because if somebody then goes and takes something from those old drawings and relies on it as the gospel of here's what this shear panel was, but in the field it changed and wasn't documented, then
Different permit.
then we become liable again because they relied on the information, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff.
And that's our problem too, is things change in the field and people do go around and just sue.
Sure.
You didn't put a stud in that area, and it's all settlement. But I mean, every $10,000 we have to pay out some
Good
settlement,
point.
it's another $10,000 I don't want to pay out.
Right.
Here's a
Always
question.
a no in my book,
Like, we obviously have the process that we have to follow,
totally.
but we also can direct people how we want, right? And so a question for you all is it your preference, you know, we can tell people, look, we'll do what we're required to by state law with 30 days and sending in like, and I hear what you're all saying. Would you also like us to say, you know, and we suggest that your professional reach out to the party that you're requesting for, you know, they have them make the connection professional to professional?
Or homeowner too, I don't think it's just professional.
Yeah,
I
sure.
don't want the homeowners to have it, 'cause the homeowners have it, the attorneys have it, the attorneys have it, we get a letter.
But is that,
I would just say it's a default no, like, do what you have to do statutorily,
Yeah.
but I don't know why we're trying to make it easier.
I think viewing is allowed.
Yeah,
Come and
allowed.
view it, look at the screen. We used to have microfiche out here, I don't know if we still do, and you could go look at
We
old
have.
plans.
yeah.
Yeah, we could go look at old plans. That was totally allowed.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
could get a
we
sense-
have to.
And oftentimes for me, it was coming in to see who was the architect so that I can go contact them. That's all I got out of that viewing. But it's the replication and.
What if we ask more questions? Maybe that's just how we'll begin to exercise that discretion, is just ask more questions up front. Because if it's limited to like one wall that they just need information on, or one floor,
Honestly, it's a no, it's always a
so
no.
it's always a no.
So for me, I mean.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I mean, not to be a jerk, but it's just a no, there's no reason to ever have what's in the walls go out to the public.
Well, also, you want to be responsible for, the city told me this is the way that it was, so I proceeded on this.
I wouldn't be responsible, but Pat would be.
Right.
But, right, so like I hear your concern.
There's just no reason.
Yeah.
It's not doing a public, I mean, I guess it's doing a public service, it's not doing a professional builder or design
Right.
service.
Right.
I mean, you
Okay,
can't go, I don't know, my 2 cents.
thank you, appreciate that. One other thing that's come up, and if anyone has questions or comments online, raise your hand, but just for the good of the group is entitlements. Like, I know things are a little nutty out in the world, and so people are sitting on entitlements a little longer than I think everyone would hope. So just like, we do our best to remind people when they need to be renewed and if they can be, but please pay attention. Like, please, because I don't want your entitlements to expire. We don't want to re-entitle your projects, we want you to build them and we're all gonna be happy, but, so we try to catch them, but ultimately, like, these are your projects, so if you can come to us again and ask the question, hey, how long do I have on this one, or what do I need to do? Because you usually have the ability to extend things, and we're more than happy to process that and get you an answer quickly. But we can't do that if it's after the fact, so that's just a little warning as people are sitting on projects a little longer, is just pay attention to entitlement dates, please. Any other questions, comments? And let people out to go get sandwiches. Good? Well,
Thank you for having these meetings. I want to
Yeah.
just throw it out for all of us. These are really helpful, and I'm sure they're a pain for all of you, but they're really, really helpful for us. And sometimes it's the only time we get to see these guys, so
Yeah.
Appreciate it, and you, and so I appreciate it, thank you for doing it.
Not a pain,
They're not a
we
pain.
enjoy them,
Yeah.
so. All right, awesome,
Thanks
thank you
all.
all,
Thank you.
appreciate it.